Period 4. I guess I'll, try to, make sure I get it up here. 18. This time on part 2, we're going to get the end of the era of good feelings. 1825 to 1848. You will not have a question about what period. You know for a DBQ that you get. Some people will get different DBQ essay prompts. You have to recognize the context of what's going on in history at the time. What is going on at this time? So, part 2 here is Jacksonian democracy. Anytime you see the years around or dates or things of that nature or events between 1825 to 1848-ish or something like that, you think of Jacksonian democracy. And of course, you say, Mr. Price, you idiot, Jackson only served from 1829 to 1837. Correct. But it's all encompassing in here of what is Jacksonian democracy. You have to know this. This should be your Brown versus Board of Education. This should be your Marbury versus Madison. Don't get tripped up on this. Even if you don't get a question about this on May 15, you should know this to give any type of historical context in the mid-19th century. You have to know Jacksonian democracy and what it means. You have to, and I'm putting up here all the things, and it's quite a bit in a way that I'm putting up here because students get confused and they hear the name and the phrase and you do not know what it means. You don't know what's synonymous to Jacksonian democracy during this time. What is going on? You should have this down packed. And what is this? Is the expansion of democracy. You have universal, white manhood suffrage. Property qualifications are being lessened or they just get rid of them. You don't have to know this, but really of eligible voters in 1824 was about 27%. By 1840 of the election of, William Henry Harrison over, Henry Clay, you're talking about, well, not over Henry Clay, so they're both Whigs there like that. So over Martin Van Buren, my apologies, was 80%. 80% of the eligible voters are voting there. Tremendous for the lessening of the kind of qualification, the growing democracy up here. So you're having, and I'm going to have a lot of these things up here, and I'm just speaking on the go. So not only that, you had the beginnings here of that you have not King Caucus anymore, but now the idea of conventions that people meet together to kind of select their candidates. You have now more voting for a representative, voting for an elector, than being appointed. This expansion of democracy. You have now party system being accepted. You have now active campaigning, maybe not by the presidential candidates themselves, because it's a little bit taboo. Still, at this time, you don't get that until really the 20th century, that, people go out here and start having these massive campaigns earlier. And I'm talking about early for them is October, like that, in this, for campaigning, and it becomes very competitive between parties here. And again, we had the birth of the Whig Party, which is kind of really the, rebranding of the Federalist Party here. So you have all that in here. And westward expansion is definitely encouraging democracy. Spoil system is kind of replacing permanent government offices. This is the beginning of patronage. It has a good and bad side. The good side is that you should reward your supporters. You should have somewhat of a turnover in government. The bad thing is this kind of corruption, appointing people that may not be qualified. It's not based on some kind of meritocracy in here. But to the victor goes the spoils. All this is synonymous with and this, I think it's the last thing I put up here, with something that's called, when Jackson is elected president, and during this time, it's the common man's era. So all that should be tattooed, stamped into your brains, because this is what you see, this expansion, or you could almost say how we label explosion of more opportunities into being involved in the political process. And again, this is really white males for sure, but as opposed to England, which has 10% participation even in the mid 19th century, and we're having 90% eligible, like, white males can vote. That's tremendous, and we're really taking leaps and bounds ahead of the world, and are expanding, people, participating in, our electoral process. Pretty amazing here, and you did in really kind of opposition of the kind of with the fears of democracy, the mob rule, and the kind of, the people are stupid and illiterate, they don't know, so they need their own property, whether that be land or some type of, farm equipment or some type of things, their house or whatever, to qualify. So you really have this. And I'm emphasizing this probably because it's number one, because if you don't learn some of the other stuff that's going over, learn number one. All right, so make sure that you have that down. And some of you are like, Mr. Price, I have that down. I know how it's labeled in different ways. I know all about Jacksonian democracy and what it will do, what it will expand. And just because Jackson served between 1829 to 1837, you can still kind of, in context to events leading up to the Civil War, or what was happening here during this time in the mid 19th century, call it the era of Jacksonian democracy. Even other presidents say here, Harrison, Tyler, Polk, Quincy Adams, it doesn't matter. Just this is known as the Jacksonian era or Jacksonian democracy. Very good. Major movements and influences that I will talk about a little bit later. Second Great Awakening, Manifest Destiny, really part one, to kind of the beginnings of this Manifest Destiny here. And you get westward expansion and more intense sexualism, because you see this with the Second Great Awakening. I'll talk more about that. All right, I'll come back for these 4 examples. Now, the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Let's just say you want to remember something. You remember the big 3 in the presidency of Andrew Jackson, not the Peggy Eaton affair. You don't need to know about that. You don't really know about his kitchen cabinet, and his election of 1821 was very, very harsh and very cruel and a lot of name calling. But the big 3, the big 3. The big 3. All right. The nullification crisis, you have to know that. The Indian Removal Act of 1830. All right, so nullification crisis really starts before Andrew Jackson's presidency, but don't worry. He's going to be involved in trying to enforce it, trying to preserve the Union, and into the debate between him and Calhoun. So don't worry about that if it's kind of technically, because they was trying to always, his enemies, like Clay, was always trying to do Jackson in, make sure that he was not going to be elected. They think he is the crazy man, and as you know by some of his actions, it does seem crazy, like in the Seminole War, into War of 1812. Andrew Jackson does have street cred, as I always want to say. He's definitely a war hero. He's definitely someone who puts himself on the front lines. He's, as we know, and he's ready to fight or duel at any time, even though it was not as many duels as we would like to think so. But anyway, I know you say, "Oh, get back to the big 3, Mr. Price." Well, it's good. That's why I take my time. It takes a lot of time to annotate these things to make sure that it's up there and that you get this down here of what debate. And the last thing, of course, is the bank war. All right, it really kind of starts in the election of 1832. All right, the nullification crisis. Now, there's something, it involves what? the 1828 tariff abominations. The reason why I talk like this, because I'm really emphasizing that the nullification crisis, what's that? I know about the tariff war or the tariff debate. Well, this is the nullification crisis in a way here. All right, in a sense here, you got from the American system, 1816, you've got a tariff. It's 24%. You know, you're trying to again, it seems like it favors the North and some of the Western territories in the States here as far as having these high tariffs, and it increases to 37%, 1824, and then finally to the abominable 45% in 1828. Calhoun is already writing in his South Carolina exposition that, hey, states' rights, states' rights. This is the thing that you have to remember, and it's up here. It's more about a states' rights debate, foreshadowing the slavery debate in pre-Civil War. So that's where you get the context of this. That's why it's so big in a way. It's foreshadowing, it's the warm-up, it's the kind of prologue to the Civil War and the continuing harsh debates. It's the extension of the Alien Sedition Acts and the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, the compact theory of states have this right to nullify actions by the federal government, who has supreme authority. So that's what this is about. The resolution, you don't have to get into too much details of Webster-Haynes debate, liberty and union, now and forever, let's say one and inseparable with that. You don't have to get into maybe in the end, the Force Act. Clay, the great compromiser, comes up with something where Andrew Jackson would not have to go down to the South Carolina and basically lynch some of the people there and start an early Civil War. That in this case, he's against breaking up the Union, the nullification crisis here, and it kind of resolved by 1833 with Clay's compromise. All right, next big thing, Indian removal. 1830, don't worry about Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, 1831, and Worcester versus Georgia, 1832. Just knowing that Jackson's motivation, in his way, he's being altruistic and he has sincere motives, that he's saving the Cherokee people by giving them to the Oklahoma Territory and the other so-called civilized tribes, and then I kind of get uneasy calling them, bestow that kind of even nickname upon them. The Muskogee and again, Chickasaw, you should know, what ones are labeled in the Southeast to be removed in the Oklahoma Territory. And as Tecumseh says, it's always they're there forever as long as a river runs and the wind blows, and that's a false promise. Begins this kind of what we kind of come known as the Trail of Tears, kind of the apex, which is in 1838, 1839, post-Jackson's presidency, you into Martin Van Buren's kind of presidency, where they're kind of the mass, forced migration event of the Cherokees going to Oklahoma Territory, where hundreds just die on the trip. So that's what it kind of leads up to. And this is going to be the pattern, these kind of forced migrations and expulsions from Indian Territory, forced treaties that leaders must sign, and they don't really not representative of the nation or tribal group to serve. We saw that in the We Shall Remain video, if you want to go back to. Third big thing, of course, is the bank war, if you want to say that. It's not a literal war, the bank crisis. Is that Jackson's going back to states' rights. Jackson is going back to protection of the kind of being the common man's champion. Bank represents the elite. It represents Nicholas Biddle. It represents the Hamiltonians and his kind of descendants in a way. And it represents that, what the Jacksonians don't believe. They believe in strict constructionism. They believe that, that it's not in the Constitution. It's not a check or balance on this private / kind of public bank sharing here. So take the money out of the banks, kind of really destroys the economy and what leads to the Panic of 1837. But the bank battle and stuff, and he's, supposedly attributed, says that it was worrying him into the night that the bank is trying to kill him, and he's going to kill it first. But a lot of cartoons at this time, you get the kind of vetoes of King Andrew Jackson. That's a very common cartoon at this time, so that would be great if they have that, Jackson. Very good. All right, so we have that, the big three, and I think I've went over, all those things. Oh man, maybe again I'll hit something that's close, but there's a lot of things coming. There's, three big things coming up. Second Great Awakening. Everybody says Mr. Price. I says the 1830s, and Mr. Price is really Second Great Awakening. It's the 1790s. I say yes, true. All right, let's just say it's not a day. Peter Cartwright, Lyman Beecher says the Second Great Awakening begins May 1st, 1830. No, but for our sakes, just remember First Great Awakening, 1730s. Second Great Awakening, 1830s. It's fine. Nobody's going to really penalize for you. It happens under really the major kind of expansion of its social reform and movement happens in the 1830s and 1840s and 1850s. So you see this kind of influence here. The thing to remember is that they're thinking this Second Great Awakening as opposed to the First Great Awakening is more about, change and individual change and social change. You can create a heaven on earth here. So it's kind of like they're going to be either going out to influence that change, whether it be abolition or temperance, or come amongst themselves in utopian communities to try to create this heaven on earth. I didn't use the acronym We Audit, but that's what you can kind of remember that women's rights, abolition, education, once again, I'm skipping over here, and to abolition, utopian movements, Dorothea Dix in there. So as far as going in there, and then you get kind of insane asylum and prison reform and the temperance movement. So and then, again, these acronyms, something that's that big, you don't have to remember all of them like that. You just remember some just Second Great Awakening reform. Definitely pick a celebrity. Sorry, got him. I know, it's the Douglas, the Jonah True. I'm getting a little depressed because the thing about all the abolitionists, Elijah Lovejoy, William Steele, other people like Lucretia Mott, Lucy Stone, all kinds of reformers, Emma Willard, and oh man, it just really, I pick a celebrity though for a push test for May 15th, and make sure you know the stance and the Anthony's, the Douglas, and the William Lloyd Garrisons, okay? And just pick one of those and make sure you know one or two of those for sure. Also too, I kind of add on this, make sure you know Clay, Calhoun, and Webster. Maybe you don't have to delve deep into them, but they're just really kind of prominent, congressmen during this time and statesmen involved into a lot of the historical context events up here. All right, cool. Last thing, Manifest Destiny, influence expansionism. All right, influence in migration. Mormons, the Germans, the Irish, all kinds of immigrants coming over, and influence the intense sexualism, which I said I'll spend more part about the expansion of slavery. Will it, go into territories that span out west? Like who wants to gain more political power? Influence conflict out here. Alamo, 1836, Texas, annexation and independence debate, 1845 leading up to the Mexican-American War, which we'll talk about more tomorrow, in 1846 with Polk. And the independence and kind of the Indian encroachment and expulsion that goes out there here, all this kind of manifest destiny, kind of part one, Santa Fe Trails, Oregon Trails, opening up there. Bam! I think I got through this, even before it just automatically turned off on me. So guys, please, what you need to know, I'm telling you, it's helpful to start here first before you get more in depth. And as Leonardo DiCaprio says about going deeper, into this is what you need to know. Love you guys. Make sure you get your work in. Make sure you communicate. Make sure you stay in contact. Make sure that you're just keeping up with stuff as best as you can. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay awesome as you guys always are. And I love you all.